October 7th, 2023 was supposed to be a day of celebration for the Jewish people and for the citizens of the State of Israel. It's the time when disciples of the Jewish faith conclude the reading of their holy book, the Torah, and they immediately turn the page towards the story of Genesis, the story of creation. But on that same day, Hamas terrorists decided to launch a massacre, not of creation, but of destruction upon the people of Israel. On that day, Hamas terrorists massacred 1,200 innocent Israelis. They raped Israeli women, they murdered Israeli children, and they took 250 Israelis into captivity inside the Gaza Strip to be held as hostages. As a consequence of that, Israel today is in the midst of a war for its very existence, fighting against enemies on 7 fronts, fighting to return and retrieve our hostages, fighting to give our citizens safety in their land. Out of that war have come stories of incredible sacrifice and heroism. In this program, I'm going to show you the stories of the injured soldiers of the Israel Defense Forces, of the police officers who bravely fought off the onslaught of Hamas. I'm going to show you the stories of the survivors of the kibbutzim that were massacred on that dreadful day.
And I would be happy to one day sit down and have this argument with them.
I'm Benjamin Anthony, CEO of the Miriam Institute, and this is Israel Outside In, the October 7 Chronicles. If you're enjoying this series, please be sure to go ahead and subscribe to the show, to write a comment, to leave a review, and to share this content with anyone and everyone that you know. It really does help us to reach an ever wider audience, and I thank you in advance of your partnership in that endeavor. Today's episode, we're going to continue our conversation with Amir Tibon, a survivor of the October 7th massacre from Nahal Oz, a kibbutz in southern Israel, and he's going to talk to us about his father's race against time to rescue him, his wife, and his 2 young daughters from the onslaught of Hamas taking place right outside their front door. It's an incredible tale of heroism, sacrifice, and selflessness, and it's all coming up right here in this episode of Israel Outside In, the October 7th Chronicles. So your father, as a father, and your mother, by the way,
Yes.
they get into their Jeep and they drive down here to come and save you. Is that right? Was that their intention?
I'm not sure if they saw the end point.
Right.
As the actual end point that happened, which was, my father arriving literally to the kibbutz.
Because they also cannot have known the scale of what was going on,
I think
right?
they said we'll start heading down there, maybe they will be rescued and we'll take them out of there. I don't think they actually imagined what it would demand of them.
But by the way, he's armed with a pistol only.
Yeah, my father, they drove home. They're home in Tel Aviv. They changed from bathing suits to clothes. My father has an old set of uniform at home, but he was under so much pressure to get going that he didn't even take the uniform. He just put on a t-shirt and took his pistol. He wanted to come alone. My mother said, you need to be on the phone. I'll drive. Because their intention was to get reach of someone in the military, convince them to send forces here. And as they're driving south, and they're pretty much one of the only cars on the road, my father is calling everyone he knows in the military and nobody's picking up the phone. Nobody's answering.
He does say that he messaged Herzi Halevi, the chief of staff, and
Herzi.
he gave him some sort of reply,
He wrote
right?
to Herzi, there are terrorists inside Kibbutz Nahal Oz, and Herzi wrote back, we know. I want to talk a bit about what happens in the kibbutz at that point, because it's important to understand.
Yeah.
Inside Kibbutz Nahal Oz, on that morning, was a small force of 10 fighters of a special unit of the Israeli police. This is a unit called the Hamas Darom, and they were here almost accidentally, I would say. In the weeks before October 7, Hamas was putting up riots and demonstrations on the border fence almost every night. They were walking to the fence, thousands of people rattling the fence, throwing stones across it. Today, in retrospect, we know they were doing it in order to test the preparedness of the Israeli military. And this crew of 10 fighters, most of them were snipers and marksmen, were sent by the police to basically take positions along the border fence in case somebody uses the guise of the demonstration to try to break into Israel. And because Nahal Oz is so close to the border fence, the police asked our kibbutz to give them a place to sleep, and we gave them 2 caravans at the edge of the community. In the days before October 7, the demonstrations stopped because Sinwar basically fooled Netanyahu. Sinwar, through the Qatari mediators, agreed to stop the demonstrations in return for economic benefits. Israel was willing to give more Qatari cash and increase the number of workers from Gaza who get permits to come into Israel. And so the demonstrations stopped. There was talk about a deal mediated by Qatar for more economic benefits, and the border area became calm. But in, again, a weird intervention of I don't know who, there was a decision to keep this little police force in Nahal Oz just a few more days, just in case something will erupt again.
Right.
And there were no demonstrations on Friday night either. And there was already some kind of a discussion of sending them home, but somehow, I'm not sure exactly at what rank, there was a decision to keep them there just for the weekend. They woke up on Saturday. More than 100 terrorists entered this kibbutz, and they and a few guys from our local security team, basically 14, 15 men, were the only ones against them. Think about it for a second. Think about the ratio. 15 fighters against, according to some estimates, 150. And it's important to remember, those 150 were better armed than our 15. They had Kalashnikovs, AK-47s, they had hand grenades, they had RPGs, they had anti-tank missiles. They had everything a soldier can want when going out to battle. Our guys had their guns, basically.
I mean, that's another one of those decisions that could or could not have been made that you mentioned earlier.
Had they been removed from here, we would have been in a much, much more difficult place today. And they were the first force to respond. And basically, when the terrorists entered the kibbutz, the first place they came was this neighborhood, because this is very, very close to the back gate that leads to the fields, and they came from the direction of the fields. And the battle was raging for almost 2 hours right in this neighborhood. Literally.
Of those 15 against the 150?
Yes. It started when my next door neighbor, Ilan Fiorentino, the security chief of the kibbutz, came out of his home with his M16 and just engaged the terrorists at very close range. And this force of police fighters had come to join him, and 2 other guys from our local security team, Nissan and Miri. And for about 2 hours, they fight the terrorists here. And this is at the same time that my parents are rushing south in their car and that we are locked here in the room. It's important to see that there are threads to the story that happen simultaneously. And when that battle is over, many of the terrorists are dead, but there are still dozens of others coming in because the border is breached and there is nobody to stop them. But there are at least 15, 20 dead terrorists in this neighborhood, literally some of them outside my house.
You mentioned there was one right outside your house.
Not 5, but one of them had an RPG on him. This is the one I mentioned.
RPG.
Yeah. At least 15, 20 bodies of terrorists in this neighborhood, including 5 on my house. Ilan died in the battle, my next door neighbor, father of 3 young girls. His wife and daughters are in the safe room all this time, and they're hearing the battle, and they imagine that he's out there fighting. One of the police fighters, Yaakov Krasninsky, 23-year-old guy from Jerusalem, dies in the battle right next to my house. He was not supposed to be here. He was supposed to go home for Saturday, and he switched with a friend from the unit. And he died here. And 5 of their guys are wounded to a level that takes them out of operational capacity. They're wounded mostly in their feet. So by 9 a.m., Benjamin, out of the original, let's say 14, there's another one that I'm counting who was fighting in a different part of the kibbutz. Out of the original 14, you're left with 7. Ilan is dead, Yaakov is dead, and 5 guys are wounded. Out of the 14, 7 are down, and there are 7 guys now responsible for the protection of this kibbutz. Nissan and Miri from the security team, and the 5 police fighters who are still on their feet. They have 2 armored vehicles. They're driving with them around the community, and they're responding to WhatsApp messages from people who are saying, I have a terrorist in my house, I have a terrorist in my window, I have a terrorist in my yard. And of course, they are doing their very, very best to save everyone, but they cannot save everyone because there's 7 guys. And during the fighting, one of their 2 armored vehicles goes kaput. It gets hit by an RPG and cannot be used anymore. So they're all crammed now into one vehicle. And they keep hearing from people in the military, hold on just a little longer, we're coming. We're sending forces, we're coming, we're sending forces, and the hours go by and nobody comes.
And you're in your safe room while all of this is going on. By the way, will that story be told in the Gates of Gaza?
Absolutely, yeah.
You go into that.
I'm going into that story, yes.
So you're there waiting, and your father is on his way down, and you're texting intermittently with your father. Is that right?
Not all the time, because there were communication problems. Inside the safe room, there was not a very good cellular connection, but we had on and off.
But it wasn't that the cellular coverage went down.
No, it wasn't
complete. It's a reinforced room.
Yeah, and I think there were also some problems regionally in the coverage, but I'll just say it was not throughout the day. There were times when you had connection for 2 or 3 minutes and then an hour with no cell connection. That's how it went. It's a war zone here. And again, this is because I think they realized something that took me more time to internalize, that if they will not come, maybe nobody will come. So they're driving on their way. Around 8:30 a.m., while the battle here is raging in the neighborhood, they are entering the Gaza border region. They're near Sderot, and they see a police car basically blocking the road. Policemen from both sides of it are exchanging fire with a white SUV ahead on the road, one of the Toyotas that the Hamas came with. And one of the police officers sees their Jeep arriving and goes like this, get out of here, get out. So they stop their vehicle at the side of the road, and they're thinking what to do. They want to bypass the road and go through the fields. And suddenly, from a ditch next to the road, a young couple, man and woman in their 30s, basically makes a run toward their car. And they're in party clothes. My parents don't understand, what is this? This is not people who ran away from home somehow.
Right.
They're in party clothes.
Right.
They open the Jeep, they put them into the car, and they ask them what's going on. And the woman says, everybody's dead. They killed everyone. Basically, this was a couple, Bar and Lior, who had escaped from the Nova music festival. They took their car, they managed to get away right when the terrorists started arriving. The terrorists along the roads fired at their car and it went out of operation. They ran by foot, they don't know for how long, they're not from this area. They found this ditch along the road to hide in, and then they came out when they heard my parents' car and some ambulance that was passing, and they basically ran to my parents. And my parents had to make a decision there, because their original plan was to go through the fields and try to approach Nahal Oz, not on the road. But doing that would basically mean deserting this young couple in a very, very dangerous place. This gunfight was happening very, very, close. It's like meters away.
If you're enjoying this series, I'd like you to please partner with us by subscribing to the show, leaving a comment, leaving a review, and by sharing this content with anyone and everyone that you know. Doing so really does help us to reach an ever wider audience, and I thank you for your collaboration in that endeavor.
I said, okay, first of all, we get them out of here. So they turn around the car and they drive them to Ashkelon. They go back 15 minutes north, and they bring them out of the war zone, out of the Gaza border zone, and they drop them next to 2 police cars at the entrance to Ashkelon, and now they know they're in good hands. And
but there's more to it than that, though, isn't there? Because it's not just a question of do we leave this couple or not. It's also, we've got our son, our daughter-in-law, and our 2 granddaughters. For this couple that we don't know, we're going to delay our arrival to our family. That has to have gone through that. I mean, it's the most incredible decision to say we're going to delay our arrival to our family and take care of this couple as though they are our family, and we're going to divert by at least half an hour, according to what you said, right? They're going to go back 15 minutes and then forward 15 minutes.
I don't think there's any other choice, Benjamin. What, are you going to leave people to die there on the road?
No, I agree with you, and I think it's incredible, but at no point do I think that that's something to be taken for granted, because I'm not sure most people would make that decision. I hope nobody ever has to make such a terrible decision, but it's not something to take for granted, right? That's an incredible story of responsibility, of weighing options and coming to a decision.
It's something that I'm very proud that they did. And, we've met this couple since. We've had them for a Shabbat dinner. They're wonderful people. They have 2 amazing little kids. And they're also heroes. They are heroes. They were determined to stay alive for their 2 young kids. And they ran away and they got fired directly, by the terrorists at their car. And they kept running on foot and they found a place to hide and they made a dash for the road. And they did everything so that the 2 young children will still have parents at the end of that day. And I have a lot of respect for them. And after dropping them off, my parents basically tried to come back to the border region, but from a different road this time. At some point, ran into a police checkpoint on the road. And the police checkpoint was very, very important because these checkpoints that the police had placed along the roads saved many, many lives on October 7th. They stopped the terrorists from going, further north into Ashkelon and Ashdod. But at that moment, for them, it was a problem because they want to get to Nahal Oz.
Right.
And the police officers would not let them pass. And one of them even told my father, recognizing him, being, a famous former general, Noam, you must know, the military is taking care of it. Now, by that point, my parents had been in touch with us. They had also been in touch with some of our neighbors in the community because we were no longer able to communicate. And they spoke specifically one conversation that impacted them with a man named Eitan. Eitan is in their age group, in his early 60s, and he's like our adoptive grandfather in the kibbutz. He's a very close friend. Right. And my father calls him and says, Eitan, I cannot speak to Amir and Miri anymore. Can you somehow direct forces to their neighborhood? And Eitan, from his own safe room with terrorists outside his house, tells him, no, what forces do you want me to send? There's nobody here. There's this small group of the police fighters with Nissan and Berry, 7 men, and they are shouldering the defense of the entire community. There's nobody to send. And so when this police officer, 10 minutes after the conversation with Eitan, tells my father, Noam, don't worry, the military is taking care of it, that's when there's like this ka-ching moment. Right. My father, okay, we have to take care of it ourselves. Right. And they just bypass the checkpoint, they run through the fields. And when they reach the area of what we call Sha'ar HaNegev junction, where the road spills into the border area, they basically are now navigating between dead bodies on the road. They are driving in a road littered with dead bodies, dozens of cars burnt or poked by bullets. And my father, who had fought in all the wars since 1982 and had seen some death in his life, basically tells my mother, I'm not sure we can keep going. This just may be too dangerous because they are seeing an amount of bodies that he had not seen in his entire life. He tells her, I've never seen so many dead bodies. And this is an interesting moment. My mother basically tells him, listen, what if I told you about a couple? They are 10 kilometers from their son, daughter-in-law, and 2 young granddaughters. There are terrorists in their community. The military is not responding. And they're deliberating if they should go forward or not. What would you tell this couple? And he didn't need to answer. They just decided, okay, we're going. And they navigate between these dead bodies. They arrive to the entrance of Kibbutz Mefalsim, which is a 10-minute drive from here in regular times. And over there's another gunfight on the gate of this kibbutz. And they jump from the car, they go into a bomb shelter on the side of the road, and they hide in that bomb shelter. When the battle is over, it takes, a certain amount of time. Time in that day was something that people had a hard, it was difficult. Exactly. Yeah. But when it's over, they get out of the bomb shelter and 3 jeeps that belong to an Israeli special unit, 3 armored jeeps, stop in front of their bomb shelter. And my father feels like his prayers have been answered in a way. Right. 3 armored jeeps with a group of well-armed soldiers. And he goes to them and he says, guys, the battle here is over. The terrorists are, this is done here. But there are terrorists in Nahal Oz. It's now after 11 a.m. Everything takes time. There's no military there. Let's go to Nahal Oz. I'll take you to the terrorists. You can kill them. And these guys have already fought in Sderot that morning, and they missed by a few minutes this battle in Mefalsim, and they're dying to go with him. They
want to get in the fight.
They are not young soldiers. These are career fighters, and they want to go and kill terrorists. And unfortunately, their commander, and I'm not criticizing or blaming him, really, but I want to describe the mindset that existed. Their commander says, we can't go. We're waiting for instructions. He's there, and he just fought in Sderot, and he wants to know where to go next.
Where does that mindset come from? That's completely the wrong mindset of we're waiting for instructions.
I don't want to criticize. I understand, Benjamin. I understand where he's coming from. He's coming from a place that there needs to be order and a chain of command.
But there also needs to be leadership in the moment and decision-making in the moment. I know you don't want to criticize him, but I just will say, even from my time and my position in Tzahal, which is not a high position, that is inculcated within the soldiers, within the fighters, at a very, very early stage.
I think his fighters, at least that's, how my parents tell it, and one of the people who was there that I spoke to, they wanted to go. He insisted that he needs orders, and they were waiting for 10 minutes or more. And he did not get any orders, not of his fault, because the chain of command was broken. The military bases along the border were themselves under attack.
Right.
And there was no communication with many of the senior commanders.
But to go back to what you said earlier, when you first realized this is the Yom Kippur War.
Yeah.
But a story of independent thought and taking, we all know the story of Koach Tzvika, for example.
People who just took an initiative.
Just took an initiative and said, we're going, we understand what's going on, we have to go. I also have another question for you, because I don't want to ruminate on someone that you don't want to criticize, because I'm sure you're correct. I don't know that individual. I don't know the story the way you know it. But I wonder, when your father was appealing to them, was he appealing to them saying, my son is there?
Yes,
He was.
my family is there. My family is there. And this is something that eventually, after 10 or 15 minutes, one of the fighters, a man in his late 30s, career fighter, his name is Avi, he says, fuck it, I'm going with Noam. And he basically leaves the unit over there, waiting for instructions. And with my father, they take my parents' Jeep, which is not an armored vehicle. He took a huge risk upon himself. My mother stays in the bomb shelter on the side of the road outside Mefalsim, still, an open war zone. And my father and Avi start driving to Nahal Oz. Avi has a weapon, I think M4. My father has a pistol, and they're going.
And they arrive at Nahal Oz.
No.
There were some detours along the way as well, weren't there? There were some stories about...
They are driving toward Nahal Oz. On the way, they pass by the gate of Kibbutz Kfar Aza, and they see a large military force, kind of like, approaching the kibbutz, and it gives them some hope that maybe Nahal Oz as well is being approached. And they go, and they get to this roundabout where you need to take a right toward Nahal Oz and basically drive west as if you're going to Gaza. Because the road to Nahal Oz basically takes you almost to Gaza City, and Nahal Oz is at this little spot at the edge of it, right before the border fence. And they get on the road, and behind them there's another military jeep. This military jeep was a force of officers from the paratroopers brigade. They are led by a young officer named Ro'i, and I've interviewed him for the book. He was going to the Nahal Oz military base, not to the kibbutz.
Right.
And again, this is the story of improvisation and not waiting for orders. He was fighting with his men in Sderot. They finished a battle over there. They went to Kfar Aza. Why did they go to Kfar Aza? Not because anybody gave him orders, because he saw pictures of people being slaughtered in Kfar Aza. He took the guys, said, we're going there. When they arrived to Kfar Aza, they see the same military presence that my father had seen a few minutes earlier. And a commander there of the paratroopers tells Ro'i, we are here, there's nobody in Nahal Oz, and we're hearing from Tomer Greenberg, the commander of Golani Gdud 13, the 13th Battalion of Golani, that his men are being slaughtered in the base. Go there. And it's not an order, he's not waiting for it, he just turns around, turns his men, okay, change of mission, somebody else is in Kfar Aza, we're going to Nahal Oz military base. They start driving there, and they're basically driving now behind my father and Avi. It's like a little convoy, civilian car, military car. On the winding road to Nahal Oz, which you drove today, there's a little area where there's this bend, and there's some forestry there. And when they get to that bend, and it's a beautiful road, eucalyptus trees, they see in front of them a military Wrangler, military green Jeep, completely full with bullet holes. To the right of it, taking cover behind the tires of the Jeep, are 5 Israeli soldiers. To the left of it, in an ambush position within the forest, are a group of Hamas fighters. And there is an ongoing battle there. They stop their vehicles and they basically run toward that hurt force, that Jeep that's completely full of bullets. And my father and Avi get there first, and the paratroopers are close behind them. And when my father gets there, basically he sees 5 Israeli soldiers behind the Jeep. 2 of them are alive, injured but alive, and they're fighting, and 3 of them are dead. This is the first force that tried to arrive to Nahal Oz. It was a force from the Maglan Special Unit, one of the best units in the military. It was led by a young officer called Chen Buchris, deputy commander of Maglan. With him was Iftach Yavetz, the unit's intelligence officer. And the third guy who is killed there is Afik Rosenthal. He's from a kibbutz near Rehovot, Kibbutz Kfar Menachem. He was the paramedic of the force, and he basically died. My father sees him with his medical kit in hand, trying to save his 2 comrades. And this is where my father now joins the battle. And the 2 guys who are alive, Alon and Yonatan, are basically screaming at my father, bring us magazines. Tavit Achmoshet. Right. So he takes the magazines from the vests of the 3 dead guys and brings it to the 2 living guys. And he checks the pulse of Chen Buchris, the commander, and sees that he's completely dead. And then he just becomes a soldier. He takes Chen Buchris' helmet and M16, which has a Trigicon rifle scope, and just joins the gunfight, like another soldier. And together with these two wounded guys from Maglan and with Avi and the paratroopers, they finished this ambush. They killed the remaining Hamasniks. One of them is injured and begins running toward the kibbutz. One of the Hamasniks is injured. The lone survivor from the ambush force runs toward the kibbutz. And now the road to Nahal Oz is open. And it's about 12:30 p.m. now. We know the time frame here because at noon exactly, Iftach, the Maglan intelligence officer, sent a WhatsApp message to my neighbor Ilan, the security chief.
Okay.
Ilan was dead already. He died in the morning. But he writes to him, "Hi, this is Iftach from Maglan. We are approaching the kibbutz." And he saw that the WhatsApp was not received, that Ilan couldn't read it, and they actually convinced them to not wait. Again, not wait for orders, not wait for instructions, dash forward, and they paid with their lives for it. They ran forward, and I want to say something, Benjamin. If they had not run into this ambush and began fighting it, that ambush would have killed my father and Avi, who were 5 minutes behind them. But now the road is open, there's no more ambush, and my father wants to go to Nahal Oz. But he can't. Because on the road, there is one of the paratroopers, a young officer named Yedidia, and he's been hit in the stomach with a bullet, and he's bleeding very badly. And two of the Maglan fighters are also injured, Alon and Yonatan. And Ro'i, the commander of the paratroopers, comes to my father, and for the first time, he recognizes him. Until that moment, he didn't know that this man fighting next to him is retired General Noam Tibon. For him, it's just some fighter. And he says, "I want to go after the terrorists who escaped. Can you evacuate the wounded?" And my father, the one thing he really wants to do is to, get in his car and come to Nahal Oz and drive to our house.
He wants to get to you.
But if he will do that, this paratrooper that just fought next to him will die on the road. So he tells Ro'i, "Okay, put him in my car." And they put Yedidia, the injured officer, who was very brave. He ran out of the vehicle and basically ran toward the ambush and took fire that was, aimed at him and made it possible for the others to finish the ambushers. They put Yedidia in my father's car, and the two Maglan wounded who are a little more independent, they're not as badly wounded, they enter themselves, and my father turns around and goes back to Mefalsim to bring these wounded soldiers to my mother, who's waiting there in the bomb shelter. And that was a very important decision, because if he had not done that, Yedidia would have died there.
It's just another example of this incredible decision-making by him when he's got a priority, which is to get to you and to your family, but yet he feels this responsibility for the injured as well. It's really remarkable.
I think specifically here, he felt more than a responsibility, he felt camaraderie with this guy. He didn't even know him, but this guy just fought next to him. And these two other guys, these two other guys from Maglan were the first ones to try to reach. Where did they try to go? They tried to reach our kibbutz. They tried to come here and save us. He couldn't leave them there. So he takes them to Mefalsim, back to the bomb shelter where my mom is waiting. And he tells her, "Gali, get out." And he shows her, Yedidia, and says, "You need to rush into the hospital." And my mom, that's what she does. She takes the car and she drives the three wounded guys to the hospital, and Yedidia made it alive. And while he was in the hospital, after surgery, he had a son born 2 floors above him.
Really?
Yes. And we visited them and we met the baby. But now there was a problem. My father didn't have a car anymore. And it's now almost 1 p.m. We're still in the safe room. No word from us. And that's when an angel arrived. Israel Ziv. Israel is a 67-year-old retired general like my father, former paratrooper. He lives in Jerusalem. Got up that morning, got out of his house, drove with a pistol to the border area and started looking for ways to help. And when at some point he was told by some soldier that there are people in distress in the bomb shelters along the road. So he started stopping by the bomb shelters, and in one of them, he met my mom. And they know each other because Israel used to be my father's commander in the paratroopers. She, "What are you doing here?" This little dialogue. And then when my father arrived with the injured guys and my mom took them to the hospital, the last sentence she told him, it was all, in the rush of the moment, "Talk to Israel." And he's like, "What?" But then he saw this white Audi Jeep with Israel inside of it, and he just realized, I have a ride back to Nahal Oz. He came to Israel. He said, "Israel, I need to go to Nahal Oz." Israel said, "I know, get in," because my mom already told him. And my father tells him, "Israel, it's dangerous. I just came back from a battle. 3 guys are dead. He said, get in the car. And so they just started driving. And now my father has a gun. He has Chen Buchris's M16. And I want to say something here about Israel. The values that he,
absolutely,
showed. Because values is not what we say. Values is what we do. We can all talk about values, but the question is, what do we do? And he was willing to risk his life for my father, to bring him to Nahal Oz. They drive, they get back to this road. By now there's no ambush. And they see Ro'i and his paratroopers now in the forest chasing, I don't know if they got that one terrorist, maybe they thought there was another one. And here there's a funny scene that from Ro'i's perspective, and again, I interviewed him for the book, Ro'i, just, 15 minutes ago, he realized that one former general was here fighting with him, and he's not even sure what he's doing there. Right. Now, the guy took the wounded, and he's back with another former general. Now he's got two, retired. And he was like, what's going on here? But they told him, Ro'i, stop wasting time on this one or two terrorists in the woods when there's an entire kibbutz to save. And at first he tells them, gentlemen, it's an honor to have you here next to me, but I'm the commander here, which is true. But then he thought about it another moment and he told himself, okay, these old war dogs, they know what they're talking about. Right. I'm chasing one or two guys here when, And so he got his men back and they basically drove. And at 1:15 p.m., they arrived to this T-junction where you have a right turn to the base and a left turn to the kibbutz. And Ro'i is actually leading. He's the car in front. And he sees on the right side the base burning. The terrorists had set it on fire. And on the left side, he sees through the fields of the kibbutz a convoy of military vehicles approaching Nahal Oz, approaching the kibbutz. This is the reinforcement from the Maglan unit that Chen and his men did not wait for when they decided to run forward. And so Ro'i takes a right turn with his men, goes into the base. They fought for long hours in that base and they saved every soldier who was still alive after the massacre. They really saved many, many lives. They're absolute heroes. My father and Israel take a left turn and they basically join this Maglan force that's arriving from the fields. Israel sees that there's a military here now. He tells my father goodbye and he goes off to fight in Be'eri. And my father at 1:15 p.m. enters Kibbutz Nahal Oz with this group of 40-something Maglan soldiers. They are led by a very, very good young officer named Eshel. I also interviewed him for the book. Outstanding commander. And when they get into the kibbutz, they meet the 7 lone defenders who've been fighting since 9 in the morning, alone, after their comrades had been, injured or dead. Which is an unbelievable situation. This military reinforcement arrives, and the way Eshel, this Maglan officer, described it to me, he said it looked like their armored vehicle had been to hell and back. Completely full of cracks from the bullets. The air conditioning stopped working because it was hit by some kind of a missile. They were baking inside of it, basically. They were dehydrated. Unbelievable heroes, these 7 guys. So they team up, and Nissan, who is now basically our security chief because Ilan had died, he sits with Eshel for a few minutes. They divide the kibbutz into 4 strips. Each group of soldiers receives a strip to scan, and they just start going from home to home. And my father joins one of the groups, which eventually will make it to our house. But before that, they passed through 20 other houses because that's the route that Nissan and Eshel drew for them. And he goes with these soldiers. They are all in uniform. He is in civilian clothes. And he asked them, does anyone have an extra shirt? And nobody had, but one of them, who was a religious guy, had a tzitzit. This
the
Jewish
fringes,
ornament.
The Jewish fringes,
So he gave them a green khaki tzitzit, and that's what my father was wearing. And they go from house to house. We had no idea this was happening, but we started hearing kind of like gunfire that was a little more precise. Because it's important to understand these soldiers, after coming in, and after a few minutes there was another force that arrived from Givati. They still killed about 30 terrorists inside the community. Close to 4 p.m., we heard a bang on the window of the safe room, and we heard my father's voice, and Galia, 3.5-year-old, she said 2 words, Saba Igia. Grandfather is here. And then there was a very happy moment when, we opened the safe room door, we opened the house door, we reunited, we hugged, and we gave the girls food, and we gave the soldiers food, because many of them had not eaten anything since the morning. And then this Maglan commander told my father, okay, you stay here with your family, and we're going to start bringing people over.
מה עובר בראש של אבא שהבן שלו כותב לו דבר כזה?
דבר ראשון זה פחד אלוהים. זה הבן שלי, זה הנכדות שלי.
אבל אני את החששות שלי בדרך כלל מתרגם לפעולה, אני לא בן אדם שהפחד משתק אותו.
They started bringing the neighbors, and this was, I think, the most difficult part of the day. More difficult than being in the safe room all those hours.
Why is that?
The first family they brought is the family that lives across over here. This is the family of Ilan, the security chief. And when the terrorists arrived, of course, they first, fought him, and he died. And the soldiers, many hours later, when they come here, they see a dead terrorist on my front porch with an RPG in his hand, aimed at Ilan and Sharon's house.
Just so everybody knows, that house we can see here.
It's very close. It's
very, very
immediate
close.
range.
A few
And
feet
so the
away.
soldiers tell me we need to bring the family from that house because there's an RPG aimed at it. I said, okay, great. And I expected them to come back with 5 people, Ilan, Sharon, and 3 daughters. And they come back with 5 people. They come back with 5 people. Sharon, 3 daughters, and a 12-year-old boy who lives in a different part of the community, not part of their family. His parents live on the other edge of the kibbutz. What is this? So what happened is that on that morning at 6:30, when the mortars began, before the terrorists entered, Ariel, this 12-year-old boy, was out running in the ring road of the kibbutz. He was jogging. And his mother called Ilan and said, my boy is out running and I'm scared for him. And Ilan went out to find this boy under mortar fire, took him into his house because it was closer to where he found him, and told Sharon, his wife, now you have 4 kids in the safe room with you. There are 3 daughters and Ariel. He went out to fight, and he died in the battle. And Ariel spent the whole day with Sharon and the girls in the safe room. And on the other side of the kibbutz, the terrorists broke into his house, and they murdered his father, his mother, and his 2 sisters. He is the only survivor from this family, thanks to the heroism of my neighbor, Ilan Fiorentino. But when they came here, and Sharon saw my father, and the first thing she asks him, Noam, have you seen my husband? And then Ariel, the boy, comes to me and asks me, have you heard anything from my parents? That's when you begin to realize what happened. And this was few good hours like that, when every family that they bring into our house, it's another heartbreak, another tragedy. I think around 10 p.m., we were evacuated on a bus that took us out of the kibbutz and eventually to Mishmar HaEmek, our generous hosts, and we've been there ever since. That's the story.
I have one question for you. One question. And then we're going to do, in the next part, we're going to get your attitudes towards the leadership,
Of course.
what went wrong,
Okay.
what didn't go
Okay.
the way that it should have
Sure.
gone, and what
Sure.
should happen subsequently. But
Yeah.
when you heard that bang on the window from
Yeah.
your father,
Yeah.
and what did he say to you firstly?
Open the door.
Open the door.
Open the door. It was very practical.
Okay, open
Very
the door.
practical, yeah.
Did you have any doubt that you would hear that from him? Did you have any doubt that he would arrive? What was your feeling as a father, as a son?
I believed he will make it. I trusted him. And I was asking a lot from my own daughters at that point. I was asking them to trust their parents, that they need to be quiet and that things will be okay. And I told myself, if I'm asking a 3.5-year-old and a 1.5-year-old to put faith in their parents, I should also put faith in my father when he told me so many hours ago that he will come here. And that's what, kept me focused. I also estimated more on the logical side that in any direct face-to-face battle, he would emerge victorious because of all his experience as a fighter. The one thing I was really afraid of was an RPG or an anti-tank missile that would be launched at his car. That's something you can't really control from a close range. When Ro'i, this paratrooper commander, is arriving at Kfar Aza, and somebody tells him, go to the Nahal Oz base, people are being slaughtered, and he just decides to go there. And when my father meets Israel Ziv and tells him, Israel, take me to Nahal Oz, and he just decides to do it. And when Iftach and Chen and Afik and their 2 comrades, Alon and Yonatan, from that Maglan jeep, realize that Ilan is not answering, and they just decide to go. And when Ilan decides to rescue this boy out of the mortar fire, all of these things show you the power of leadership and the power of values under fire. And values is not what people say, it's what people do.
Yeah.
And I think today, one of the problems we have in Israel, we have people who talk and talk and talk, and we need more people who actually do in the ranks of power. We need people who set a personal example. with their leadership, not with words, with action.
And we're going to dig into that in the next chapter of this conversation.
Absolutely.
But I actually want to say two very quick points. First of all, your leadership and Miri's leadership, when others were leaving as a result of circumstances that everybody understands, this kibbutz, you decided to come here and to plant your flag and to build a family. That's not to be overlooked either. And also, I do have to say, your mother. I mean, what an incredible exemplar of these values, right? I cannot imagine, for a father to be diverted out of a sense of duty not to leave anyone behind is understandable. It's difficult, but it's understandable. But for a mother to be taking the injured to a hospital when all she wants to do is to get to her son and to her granddaughters and to her daughter-in-law, that's really a remarkable individual as well.
I think there is some element of, you can call it karma, you can call it social cohesion, the belief that I will help someone else and someone else will help me.
Right.
And I think this is something that my parents always believed in. And in a way, through all the twists and fates of October 7, it materialized, at least in our case. They helped others along the way, and there were others who helped us.
Mm-hmm. Well,
and that's the only way we can keep Israel a strong society, if that's the kind of guiding light that we have.
Well, I agree with you, and we'll continue this conversation. Thanks so much for having us in your home, Amir. Thanks for bringing this story the way you have done. It's really been remarkable for me to listen to.
My pleasure.
Tune in to the next episode of Israel Outside In, the October Chronicles, where I meet up with Amir Tibon, survivor of the October 7th massacre and author of the newly released book, The Gates of Gaza, to see how he and his family are coping at their temporary home in Kibbutz Mishmar HaEmek, the kibbutz that took in Amir, his wife, and his two daughters, and much of the community of Nahal Oz after the October 7th massacre. If you're interested in investing in the next generation of Israeli and American leadership for the benefit of both countries and the relationship between the two, then please take the time to learn about and to invest in the Miriam Institute annual Israel Strategy and Policy Tour, or ISAP, as we like to call it.
First off, I never thought I would be in Israel. When I saw that this was an opportunity, I put my name.
We really got to see the entire country in 10 days, experience the culture.
The Jewish culture was really impressive for me.
Try to get people to love each other and not to hate each other.
Really impressed by all of the different types of speakers we were able to hear.
It's for cadets, future and current officers of the United States Armed Forces, including the Army, Navy, Air Force and Marine Corps. The ISAP tour brings the best and the brightest active and incoming officers to Poland for a 3-day tour of the Polish death camps, followed by a 12-day, once-in-a-lifetime tour of the State of Israel that crisscrosses the Jewish state. 100% of the participants will go on to serve in positions of leadership within the military and beyond. The ISAP tour is your way to invest in the leaders of today and tomorrow, now.
So happy that I was selected and I was able to come. Thank you so much for the opportunity and everything you guys have done here. It's really awesome.
For the sake of the US-Israel relationship, please visit the website today at www.miriaminstitute.org/ISAP.